Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Yucks, 2 years in Tampa with the losingest team in NFL history, by Jason Vuic. Narrated by Patrick Lawlor. Growing up, I was a huge Dallas Cowboys fan, but on Sundays we got Bucs games on TV. Oh, I used to pray that lightning would come down and strike the tower so I could see the Cowboys. But it never did. So I had to watch the Bucs, the Yucks we called them, losing week after week. Warren Sapp, Hall of Fame defensive tackle, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Introduction. On Mount Olympus of futility, the 1976-77 Buccaneers are Zeus. Take the 2008 Lions, the 1974-75 Capitals, and the 1962 Mets and throw them into a bag. Then light it on fire. That's the Bucs. James Irwin, Washington Examiner. About once a week on NBC's famed The Tonight Show, comedian Johnny Carson played Karnak the Magnificent, a turbaned and shawl-wearing mystic who answered questions in sealed envelopes by touching them to his forehead. The segment began when sidekick Ed McMahon introduced Karnak as the mystic from the East and said with a grave voice, "I hold in my hand the envelopes. As a child of 4 can plainly see, these envelopes are hermetically sealed. They've been kept in a No. 2 mayonnaise jar on Funkin' Wagnall's porch since noon today." By this point, the audience, who knew the shtick, was laughing. No one knows the answers to the questions inside these envelopes, but you, in your divine and mystical way, will ascertain the answers. Karnak would nod and ask for silence. "The answer," he said in one 1974 skit, "is bedbug." Bedbug. McMahon repeated the words while Karnak opened the envelope. He paused for effect. Question: what would Republicans use to eavesdrop on a hooker? The audience laughed. If they booed, Karnak threw them a curse. "May Dr. J slam dunk your cat," he'd say, or "May your wife give mouth-to-mouth resuscitation to the Denver Nuggets." One recurring joke involved the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. In 1976, the National Football League's, NFL, newest expansion franchise lost every game, and by December 1977, it had lost 26 games in a row, an NFL record. Carson couldn't resist. Each night he told Bucs jokes in his monologue, and once, as the mystical Karnak, he provided this answer: the Titanic and the Buccaneers. The question was, name 2 disasters that were accompanied by band music. Referring to a well-known commercial in which the Pittsburgh Steelers tried unsuccessfully to destroy Samsonite luggage, Carson said the Bucs couldn't beat the bags. He began one show by saying, "What an opening. I haven't heard applause like that since the Tampa Bay Buccaneers sacked Fran Tarkenton in his hospital bed." Then, "I don't think the guys expected to win," he said. "I mean, they trotted out on the field wearing leisure suits." Even David Brenner, Carson's substitute on The Tonight Show, opened with, "I can tell you're disappointed it's me tonight and not Johnny. It's like buying tickets to see the Oakland Raiders and having the Tampa Bay Buccaneers run out instead." For a time, Carson was synonymous with the Bucs. In 1977, the St. Petersburg Times noted that Tampa Bay has had no more caustic critic than Johnny Carson. Each defeat has brought new punchlines, each shutout a new chuckle. Fans carried signs that read, "Sack Johnny," and promised that someday, when the Bucs won, they'd scream so loudly that even he'd hear them in California. But Carson wasn't the only one. Everyone, and I mean everyone, goofed on the Bucs. Kids called them the Yucks and the Sucks, And as the New York Times reported, Pam Pegg, a 23-year-old teacher and Bucks cheerleader, a swashbuckler, had to change schools when students found out who she was. Chuck Barris, the corny, absurdist host of TV's The Gong Show, who later claimed to be a CIA assassin, threatened to give contestants Tampa Bay tickets if they lost. Comedian Red Fox did a variety show skit in which he gave the team a halftime pep talk, and Dwayne, the hey, hey, hey character from the TV show What's Happening, developed a unique gambling system in which he unwisely picked the Bucks. Rerun's uncle bet on the team and lost $500. The low point, perhaps, was when Charles Nelson Riley, the worst comedian in the history of, well, Earth, said, "My career has sunk so low, I'm doing victory dinners for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers." Victory dinners for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Dumb joke, but that's how it worked, wrote one journalist. The Bucks played, the Bucks lost, the nation laughed. It laughed, in fact, through 26 straight games, nearly 2 full years of losing. The end came, mercifully, with an improbable 33-14 win in December 1977 at New Orleans. As Saints coach Hank Stram said before the game, "You know, sooner or later they're going to win one, and you don't want it to be you." Indeed, when the Saints lost to the Bucks, Saints owner John Mecum fired Stram, who said candidly, "We are all very ashamed of what happened. Ashamed for our people, our fans, the organization, everybody. This is the worst experience of my coaching career." Said one Saints fan, 11 years I've supported this franchise. 11 years. With all the money I've spent, I could have bought some land in Colombia and raised some pot." However, Bucks coach John McKay called it the greatest victory in the history of the world, and was asked to appear, you guessed it, on The Tonight Show. Witty and acerbic as always, and holding a 5-foot-long cigar, McKay said no. "I'm not going all the way out there just to be on his show," he told reporters. "I was on the show once before, and I was a star. Didn't you see me?" Nevertheless, the Bucks staff sent Carson a game ball, while the St. Petersburg Times organized a drive in which fans sent Carson thousands of Bucks Sack Johnny editions of the newspaper. A few days later, Carson, who'd been on vacation, opened with the Bucks. "Forget what's happening on the world scene," he said. "The big news is that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers finally won." The crowd roared its applause. "I understand that down there they had banners saying, 'Sack Johnny,' because of the jokes I've been making. But I intend to continue." He then said that the Bucks had received a congratulatory note from President Richard Nixon. They hadn't. Nixon had left office and was living more or less in exile. That the Bucks had torn down the goalposts during the game, and that McKay hadn't really expected to win because he'd asked the team to tie one for the Gipper. The jokes ended finally when Carson thanked McKay for the game ball graciously and said in the future he'd be behind the Buccaneers. In the coming weeks, Carson referred to the Bucks just one more time when Ed McMahon asked how Jimmy Carter was doing as president. "Well, let me put it this way," he said. "Tampa Bay won 2 more than he did." That was it. Carson's last Buccaneers joke. The next season, the Bucks were 5-11, but had a better record than the Cincinnati Bengals, the San Francisco 49ers, and the Kansas City Chiefs. "That's when we realized," said Dick Crippen, the Bucks' former play-by-play announcer, "we weren't so unique anymore. We weren't so fun anymore. We were just bad." But really, how bad were the Bucks? I mean, the 0-26 1976-77 Bucks, the franchise with the longest losing streak in NFL history. Let's do the math. In 1976, the Bucs were outscored 412 to 125. That's a per-game equivalent of 29-9. They were 28th in offense, 27th in defense, and were shut out 5 times. The team's first touchdown ever was a fumble return in Week 4. The first passing touchdown was in Week 6, and even that was a busted running play in which running back Lewis Carter was stopped on the goal line but had the presence of mind to throw. The team's starting quarterback was Steve Spurrier. Yes, that Steve Spurrier, a career backup with the 49ers who had 7 touchdowns and 12 interceptions and who was sacked 32 times. Lewis Carter led the team in rushing. He had 521 yards and 1 touchdown. The Bucs' best receiver, Morris Owens, didn't play for the team until Week 3. He'd been cut by Miami and picked up on waivers, while the Bucs' 2 kickers were 8 for 18. This was a terrible team, perhaps the worst team in the history of the NFL. In 2009, for example, the Washington Examiner offered this shameful tidbit. On Mount Olympus of futility, the 1976-77 Buccaneers are Zeus. Take the 2008 Lions, the 1974-75 Capitals, and the 1962 Mets and throw them into a bag. Then light it on fire. That's the Bucs. That same year, the nerds at sportsims.net, an online fantasy football company, hosted the Stupor Bowl, in which history's worst teams played a virtual season of games. True to form, the 1976 Bucs went 4-12, the league's worst record, then lost 24-0 to the 1971 Buffalo Bills in the final. I think this puts to bed any question about which team is the worst team of all time, said David Holt, a designer at sportsims.net. But what did the Bucs think? What did John McKay think? Well, the Southern Cal legend once told the team, if you play the best you can play and they play their absolute worst, you'll still get blown off the field. Thanks, Coach. Dubbed Dial-A-Quote by Philadelphia Eagles coach Dick Vermeil, McKay had a one-liner for everyone. I loved his sense of humor, said Pat Toomey, a Bucs defensive end. He was hilarious. As long as it was directed out, it was a release. He disarmed a lot of people, but after a while it started to turn in. Now and then it got a little dark. During the week, we didn't see him after the third game. He would stand farther and farther away at practice, symbolically disassociating himself. McKay's most famous quote supposedly came after a reporter asked him, "What do you think about your team's execution?" To which he replied, "I'm in favor of it." Once, after a loss in college, McKay told his team there were 700 million Chinese people who didn't even know the game was played. Unfortunately, I got 5 letters from China asking what happened. The jokes were endless. We didn't block real good, but we made up for it by not tackling, he said. We've determined that we can't win at home and we can't win on the road. What we need is a neutral site. In 1983, toward the end of his career, McKay cut kicker Bill Capice during the season, telling reporters, "Capice is kaput." Doug Williams, the team's quarterback from 1978 to 1982, said, "I don't think I've ever known anyone so direct. That cigar, that sucking on his teeth. People stayed out of John's way." Fans berated him. A common bumper sticker in Tampa read, "Throw McKay in the Bay." Once, in the hotline section of a local newspaper, someone posted an ad, "Wanted, coach and football team. Personnel with California experience not wanted." Apply number 1 Buck Place. On another occasion, a disgruntled fan, shirtless, shoeless, and in shorts, ran into McKay's office to complain. "Things got so bad our family didn't go out for dinner," says Rich McKay, the son of John McKay and president of the Atlanta Falcons. "We just did the drive-through a lot. My mother even had to stop going to the grocery store. I went in undercover." Rather than interact with the public, Steve Spurrier threw parties at his house. "We partied until the sun came up," says Barry Smith, a former receiver for the Bucs. "Then it was safe to go home." The players believed, at least initially, that the Bucs had a chance. "I always felt we could win," said Richard Batman Wood, a linebacker who also played for McKay at USC. "But then, my first 3 years, it was like, God, is it that hard to win? We had some outstanding people on that team, but it's a team game." And the team wasn't any good. Then there was Hugh Culverhouse, Mr. C, the Bucs' millionaire owner, a tax attorney from Jacksonville who was notoriously cheap. Culverhouse bought the team in 1974 for $16.2 million. He paid $4 million up front, and fans' season ticket payments were due 2 weeks before his payments were due. Good business, but as former Bears general manager Jerry Angelo put it, Hugh was driven by the bottom line, not the goal line. That was his philosophy, and it permeated the organization. Culverhouse gave each employee 1 season ticket. Think about it. Who goes to a pro football game alone? According to one former player, a Bucs front office assistant qualified for welfare. The team's airplane was leased from the McCulloch Corporation, the chainsaw people. There was a vending machine in the locker room that charged players for Cokes. Once, when a defensive back hurt his shoulder and trainers cut off his jersey to treat him, Culverhouse charged him for it. He billed roommates 38 cents each for a 75-cent phone call. In 1982, after quarterback Doug Williams had lifted the team from its 0-26 start and taken it to the playoffs 3 out of 4 years, he was the 42nd highest-paid quarterback in the league. There were 28 teams. Culverhouse was interested in one thing, wrote Williams, and that was making money. I don't even think he cared about winning. I know he didn't care about his players. We were pieces of meat to him. A former boxer with a pockmarked face and a bulbous nose, Culverhouse proudly wore an orange Buccaneers blazer. The team's colors were orange, red, and white, with orange as the dominant color. Orange was supposed to represent Florida citrus, but the shade in question was ugly and, well, soft. Think Walks on the Beach at Sunset, or Seals and Crofts singing Summer Breeze Makes Me Feel Fine, Blowing Through the Jasmine in My Mind. Fans called them the Creamsicles. The uniforms were already picked out by the time I got here, said John McKay. I didn't give it too much thought until I saw our buses and said, my God, we're dressed just like that bus. That's not good. The creme de la creme, however, was Bucko Bruce, the team's rakish, sexually indeterminate mascot who looked like a 70s Errol Flynn. Bruce was the brainchild of Tampa Tribune cartoonist Lamar Sparkman, who seems to have felt very passionately that the village people needed a pirate. He was a curious chap who looked like Captain Hook's wayward brother, joked one journalist, the one nobody in the Hook family talks about. Bruce is a long-haired, whimsical waif who wears an earring and a floppy hat topped by an ostrich plume. Sort of a Hedda Hopper / Barbara Stanwyck / Queen Mum look. Oh, and did I mention he was winking? Well, he was. However, Bucko Bruce was one thing. Losing game after game after game was another. Because losing teams, even more than winning teams, reveal the intricate and at times strained relationship between cities, franchises, journalists, players, coaches, owners, and fans. If winning cures all ills, as they say, losing exacerbates them. Losing is personal. "I called out to God again and again," wrote Bucs offensive coordinator and devout Christian Joe Gibbs, who coached for the team in 1978. "Why? What's going on here? Why is this happening? I believe you brought me to Tampa Bay, but for this?" Apparently, the team was so bad, losing so difficult, that Gibbs had questioned his faith. Gibbs could leave. He actually did after just a single season in Tampa. But it was the fans who stayed. With an average attendance in 1976 of just over 44,000, their numbers grew to nearly 53,000 in 1977 and to over 63,000 in 1978. Perhaps counterintuitively, the Bucs had lost 26 straight games, but somehow had gained fans. Clad in the ugliest of orange, some wearing "Go for O" t-shirts or holding up signs at the 10-yard line that read, "The Bucs stop here," they booed, they threw trash at, mocked, teased, ridiculed, and, this is the crazy thing, actually embraced the Yucks. Why? Well, fans would say it's, complicated. Loyalty, community, masochism, boredom, a feeling that one day, someday, the Bucs would win. It's an attitude that's served them well. After all, the Bucs have had 27 losing seasons in 40 years. Needless to say, they all started with the Yucks. Chapter 1. The Promoters. People always say, "Hey, you're the guy who brought the Bucs to Tampa." And I say, "No, I helped bring a team to Tampa. I had nothing to do with the Bucs." Leonard Levy, Tampa Booster. Bill Markham was a promoter, not your smooth-talking, backslapping, sell-anything-to-anyone type of promoter, but a promoter nonetheless. His product was football, professional football. The 33-year-old's plan in early 1967 was to bring his hometown something it had never seen before, a preseason exhibition game featuring two teams from the National Football League, NFL. This was before the Bucs, before Tampa even had a stadium. A 46,000-seat, two-grandstand structure had been approved by local officials and was slated to open in November 1967 with a game between the University of Tennessee Volunteers and the University of Tampa Spartans. In the meantime, the stadium's chief administrator, a local agency known as the Tampa Sports Authority, TSA, was looking for occupants. The TSA was trying to justify the $4 million it had spent to build that thing, remembers Markham, a tallish University of Florida grad and former tennis star from Fort Myers. So it focused on college games as a way of recouping its money. The University of Tampa would play home games there, but then the TSA hoped that Florida, Florida State, Miami, and Florida A&M would also play in Tampa at least once a year. The TSA had never even considered the NFL. That was the bottom of the list, says Markham. That was literally the last thing in their minds when they built the stadium in the first place. But Markham thought, why not? Tampa was football crazy, and it was common in the 1960s for NFL squads to play preseason games, called exhibition games, in even the smallest of cities. The rival American Football League, AFL did it too. There were games in Princeton, Ithaca, Bridgeport, New Haven, Norfolk, Rochester, Richmond, Raleigh, Morgantown, Tulsa, Wichita, Shreveport, Mobile, Memphis, Birmingham, and San Antonio, among others. Joe Namath's first pro touchdown was a 60-yard completion to Hall of Fame receiver Don Maynard in a 1965 preseason game in Allentown, Pennsylvania. The games were almost always charity events, hosted by boys' clubs or Rotary clubs and backed by chambers of commerce. Markham belonged to the Tampa chapter of the Junior Chamber of Commerce, the JCs, and in 1966 he'd organized a JC National Tennis Tournament at Tampa's University of South Florida. He'd done it for charity, for the fun of it. But then, in 1967, it occurred to Markham that once Tampa finished its stadium, the JCs could bring an exhibition game to Tampa too. So he bought an NFL handbook, looked up the names and numbers of the league's general managers, and started calling. His first call was to the Washington Redskins, which, despite being a mediocre to bad team in 1966, was the most popular pro team in the South. The owner of the Redskins was George Preston Marshall, an infamous racist who created a Redskins radio and TV network that spanned Dixie and stretched as far south as Miami. In fact, in the years prior to 1966, when the Dolphins entered the AFL and the Falcons the NFL, the Redskins were the only professional football team south of the Mason-Dixon line. The price was $60,000, $30,000 for Washington and $30,000 for the other team Markham found, the Atlanta Falcons. $60,000. Big bucks then, wrote Tampa Tribune sports editor Tom McEwen, a friend of Markham's and early expansion supporter. But chicken feed now. To pay for the game, Markham, who made maybe $12,000 a year as a sales engineer with General Cable, persuaded 100 JC members to sign personal guarantees of $300 each, with the rest, he hoped, coming through ticket sales. At Markham's urging, the JCs called the game the Florida Suncoast NFL Classic, instead of the Tampa Classic, in order to attract fans from the surrounding communities of St. Petersburg, Bradenton, Clearwater, Lakeland, and Sarasota. Markham told the club that Tampa alone couldn't support a game like this, but that the entire area could. Indeed, as of 1967, the Tampa, St. Petersburg, Clearwater Metropolitan Statistical Area, a term used by the U.S. Census Bureau, was the 31st largest metropolitan statistical area in the United States. If you added Lakeland, Bradenton, and Sarasota, Tampa had a local population of more than 1 million people. The region, known colloquially as the Suncoast, or simply the Bay Area, was growing. Florida as a whole was growing as few American states or regions had ever grown before. Consider this. When Florida first entered the Union in 1822, there was no Miami. There was no Tampa, no St. Petersburg, and no Orlando, and everything south of St. Augustine was either forest or prairie land, or, of course, swamp. By 1900, in spite of a railroad boom and growth in the citrus, phosphate, timber, tobacco, fishing, and cattle industries, there were just 528,542 Floridians. Population-wise, the state was a tad bigger than Baltimore. It grew somewhat in the 1920s, but beginning in the 1950s, Florida boomed. Aided by cheap land and sunshine, a surging U.S. economy, an expanding interstate system, the GI Bill for veterans, and Social Security benefits for retirees, not to mention air conditioning, The state's population grew 145% to 6.7 million between 1950 and 1970. It grew another 43.5% to almost...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?